So, let's talk about using colour to study better. My name is Paul, and I'm an Oxford qualified psychologist who teaches people how to learn more easily and live more fully. Now, if you've ever walked into a stationery shop with the innocent intention of buying just a pen and emerged 20 minutes later with a small but emotionally significant collection of pastel highlighters, you're not alone. Students have a deep and enduring faith in colour. And they're not entirely wrong. Colour can help you study more effectively, but, as I think we all know, it can also become a beautifully organised form of procrastination. There's a difference between using colour to support cognition and using it to produce aesthetically pleasing notes that no one, including you, will ever read again. So, let's separate the psychology from the art project. At its core, most of learning is about encoding, storing, and retrieving information. And one of the most robust findings in cognitive psychology is that we remember things better when they are distinctive. This is sometimes referred to as the von Restorff effect, identified by Hedwig von Restorff. The basic idea is that items which stand out from their surroundings are more likely to be remembered, which I think kind of makes sense. Colour, used strategically, creates distinction. If everything on your page is written in identical black ink, your brain has relatively few cues to differentiate what matters from what does not matter. It all blends together into a kind of intellectual beige. Well, that doesn't make sense because it's black. But anyway, you get what I mean. Introduce colour, on the other hand, and suddenly you can signal importance, category, and hierarchy. But, of course, if everything is highlighted, nothing is distinctive once more. You end up with a page that looks like a tropical fish tank and which is about as cognitively useful as a tropical fish tank. So, the first principle is restraint. Use colour sparingly and with purpose. For example, one colour for key concepts, another for definitions, perhaps another for specific examples. The specific system matters less than the consistency of your application of whichever system you're choosing, because consistency allows your brain to build associations. Over time, you begin to recognize patterns. Blue means definition, green means example, and so on. And that reduces cognitive load during revision. Now, there's also an attentional component here. Research by psychologists, including John Sweller and Daniel Kahneman, through cognitive load theory, emphasizes that working memory is limited. If your notes are visually chaotic, too many colors, too many styles, too many competing signals, you're increasingly adding to extraneous cognitive load. In other words, your brain is spending effort trying to interpret the notes rather than successfully being able to learn from them, which is obviously not ideal. Colour should simplify, it should not complicate. There's also some interesting work on colour and emotion. Studies have suggested that different colours can influence mood and arousal, though often in very subtle ways. For instance, cooler colours like blue and green are generally associated with calmness and stability, whilst warmer colours like red can increase alertness and, in some contexts, even anxiety. In fact, there was research done by Andrew Elliott which showed that exposure to red, particularly in evaluative context, can sometimes impair performance, possibly because it's associated with error, failure, or even danger, which I think makes sense. Now, this doesn't mean that you should banish red from your life entirely, but it does suggest that the emotional tone of your study materials can have a subtle impact on how you engage with them. If your notes feel overwhelming, chaotic, or slightly aggressive, you may be less inclined to return to them. Whereas if they're clear, structured, and visually calm, they become more approachable. Now, let's move from theory to practice. How might you actually use colour effectively when studying? First, use it as a means of encoding meaning, not as decoration. For example, when taking notes, assign specific colors to specific types of information. Definitions, key arguments, dates, formulas, each can have its own color, but keep the system simple. 3 colors is usually sufficient, and I would generally suggest a maximum of 5. Beyond that, you're drifting into interior design. Now, of course, if you're studying interior design, that's a different matter. Shout out to Alice. Second, use color to highlight after you understand the material, not during initial reading. This is a very common mistake. Students read a page, feel a vague sense of recognition, they immediately begin highlighting everything. But highlighting is only useful if it reflects selection, and selection naturally requires understanding. So you read it first, then you go back and highlight afterwards what you then know to be genuinely important. Third, consider using color in active recall. For instance, if you create flashcards or mind maps, color can help differentiate categories or link related ideas. This taps into dual coding, the idea explored by researchers like Alain Pavio that combining verbal and visual information can enhance memory. Color in this sense becomes part of the visual encoding. Oh, I should mention, and no hate if they work for you, I actually hate mind maps, and most of the time I don't find them effective. Definitely not for me, and to be honest, not for most students. It's surprising, but it's true. Oh, a study skills expert who doesn't like mind maps. Yeah, I can't stand them. I will definitely cover that in a future video. So, sorry, Tony Buzan, and for anyone for whom they work, you do you, boo, yay. Sorry, back to topic. Fourth, be wary of over-aestheticizing your notes. Now look, I say this with sympathy. It is deeply satisfying to produce notes that look as though they belong on a productivity influencer's desk. But the point isn't, are these notes impressive looking? Rather, the point is, do these notes help me to retrieve information, especially under the exam conditions? And those are not always the same thing. In fact, they're very seldom the same thing. There's also a slight danger that the act of making beautiful notes can create an illusion of learning. You feel productive, organized, academically virtuous even. But unless you're also engaging in retrieval practice, testing yourself, recalling information without looking, you may not actually be strengthening memory or thinking much at all. Whilst color can support learning, it cannot replace it. Finally, personalize your system. There's no universal color code that works for everyone. Some people find certain colors easier to process than others. Some may have visual sensitivities and a lot of color actually annoys them. And so, some may prefer a minimalistic approach. The suggestion that I would have is that you mustn't replicate someone else's method perfectly. Rather, you should try to create a system that makes your thinking clearer, reducing noise, highlighting structure, making it easier for your brain to see what matters and to retrieve it when you need it. Color, used well, can contribute to that. Used poorly, and it can contribute to very attractive confusion. So by all means, enjoy your highlighters, but don't turn highlighting into coloring in. Use them with purpose. Let them support your thinking rather than replacing your thinking. And, as always, if you did find any of these ideas useful, well, perhaps give a follow. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.